Welcome to the Breakfast Leadership Show, where we interview global thought leaders on business, leadership, and life. Here's your host, keynote speaker, best-selling author, and chief burnout officer of the Breakfast Leadership Network, Michael Levitt.
Welcome back. I've got Celeste Warren on the line. Celeste, how are you?
I am great.
Really happy to have you here today, and been looking forward to this conversation for a little while now. So why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Sure. Again, the name is Celeste Warren. I call myself an inspirational, dynamic dynamo warrior. I started my career as a reporter and then switched over to global human resources after going back to grad school, and have really, my career was in human resources for a couple of different companies and in different types of organization types, different parts of the division. And then the last 10 years of my career in corporate was the chief diversity inclusion officer at Fortune 50 company. And then just recently retired from there in July and have launched a consulting company and speaking engagements, and also a new book as well, my second book. And I'm enjoying the liberation. I loved working for the companies I worked for, loved the people, but it's a different type of autonomy that you have when you're out on your own and just out there, just sort of stretching your wings and growing.
It's a lot of fun, and I've done not a similar path, but a similar path. And I launched my own business, and went full in on it several years ago. And there's something about it, and I know you're relatively new into it, but you're not new into it, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm new to this." Like, no, there's a lot of things you've acquired all of these tools and experiences throughout your career. Use them. You put them in the tool bag. You figure out, okay, what do I need? And it actually, in many cases, it just automatically comes to mind. Okay, I'll do this. I'll use this and this, because you're not thinking about it. It's natural, because you've been doing it throughout your career. And going from a reporter into working into human resources, that's actually, a lot of people say, well, that's kind of a weird shift. And I look at it this way: when you're a reporter, you're investigating, you're reporting the news, you're talking with people, you're getting to see all kinds of dynamics with people. I wish the news was more positive news stories. Here's this and this, but unfortunately, and with life and humanity, a lot of times, I'm sure, in the reporting you did, may not have been, the best ideal situation. But those situations can pay off when you're working with people in an HR related matter, because people deal with things and they bring them into work. They try not to. They try to leave, all their outside of work things, but mentally it's still there, and it's weighing on them, and it takes a toll on them if it's not addressed, which we see all the time throughout our careers, and especially now, especially with burnout, workplace culture problems, and everything that we're seeing and reading and experiencing out there. It's an interesting dynamic, but all of those steps along the way obviously have paid off well for you, because those experiences you can leverage to be the best you can be wherever you happen to be.
That's absolutely correct, Michael. I like to say that I like to use this analogy where when people come to the doors of your organization, and you think of the doors like sometimes people think of them as like a car wash, like they're walking through and they're getting washed of their identities, their cultural experiences, what's happening in their community, what's happening on the news. And then they come in and they're like this sort of robot. And that's not what happens, to your point. People come in, they can't shred who they are, how they're feeling. And so the best leaders know how to meet people where they are, to be able to help them address it, but also helping them to get to this collective purpose is what I say, which is what inclusion partly is, getting them to this collective purpose of whatever the mission is of the organization and the team. But you're absolutely right.
You mentioned inclusion. I was fortunate in one of my last roles. I worked for a multi-site primary care clinic. I was the director of this clinic, and we had representation from 16 different countries working within this clinic. It was natural. It wasn't like I went out onto the job board and say, I would like to hire a nurse from Indonesia. I didn't do that, and plus there's laws against that in most, which is good. But it naturally, organically happened that way. And I looked at it as an opportunity and, for people, especially, there were, a handful of situations where there were a couple clinicians and they were originally from countries that have historically not gotten along well with each other.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, well, let's check out this dynamic. And they, on their own, without any real prodding, started to talk things through from a, person to person kind of situation, and got to the point where they said, hey, can we relocate our exam rooms so we're working close to each other because we like talking with each other? Like, hey, world peace all starts in a little medical clinic. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll work with us. But for me, I always look at it from a vantage point of, leveraging the experiences of people that are outside of the bubble that I grew up in, kind of thing, and my experiences, because I'm limited to that unless I expand and grow and put myself in situations where it's important for me to be in good places. So when you provide an environment that is inclusive, borrowing from Amy Edmondson from Harvard on her psychological safety, it creates a safe place for people. And work, for the longest time, not maybe not so much right now, but for the longest time, work was one of those places that if you had something going on in your personal life, whether being a caregiver for a parent or family issues or you name it, whatever, work in a way was kind of an oasis away from that. It allowed you to do things, do your job in an environment that you could just, focus on that and not have to think about so much the challenges that were happening outside of the house. Well, now we're seeing, and I know you saw it too, and I'm seeing it now, that there's a lot of situations where these places aren't safe for people, or not as safe as they once were. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and some ideas where you think would help, quite frankly, organizations become safer places for the people that work with them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Michael. Psychological safety is so incredibly important, especially in this day and age globally with all of the things that are happening from an external stimuli standpoint. And, technology, the 24-hour news cycle, it's hitting you in the face all the time. And so when people come to work, they're feeling a myriad of different ways. One of the things that statistics have shown, and I experienced it in my company that I was at, mental health and mental well-being is one of the top things that we're concerned about with employees because it's just been on the rise and increase. And I think it's just due to a lot of different factors, as I said, people, what's happening outside as well. Also the influx of the newer generations coming into the workforce, and they're very much attuned to their own mental health and well-being. And so psychological safety is incredibly important. And I like to say that it's a capability that all leaders should have. And if they don't know how to create that psychologically safe environment around their teams, then they're doing a disservice to their team and and to their organization. Because their job as a leader is to not just it's to optimize performance, but you don't optimize performance until you optimize the people. And that involves making sure you're meeting people where they are, finding out what is getting in the way, whether that be skills, capabilities, or what they're going through from a cultural awareness, life experience, whatever. but finding out what are the obstacles and barriers that are getting in the way from them being able to have that optimal performance or to aspire to whatever it is that they aspire in their professional lives. That's the role of the manager and the leader. And if they don't know how to do that, meeting them where they are, bringing them to a level where they're, very productive, both personally and professionally, and then surrounding them with a culture of empowerment and psychological safety so they can do what it is that you have them coming in to do every day. That the that is incredibly, incredibly important. There are lots of ways that you can do that, but everybody, different organizations, different firms and everything, they have psychological training that you can get. But what I would say the easiest thing to do if you're in an organization where that's not part of the budget, and we know we're all squeezing budgets these days, is to just have it's regular 101 management 101. Have these conversations during your one-on-ones that you have. Well, first of all, have them. Don't just see your team when you're having staff meetings, but have regular one-on-ones with them. And some statistics have shown that the more often that you have one-on-ones with your team members, the better the environment is around them, a team environment, a better culture that there is, because you've shown an interest in them. You've made them feel that they're valued. And but having just a conversation with them and not just task oriented. Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this? But how are you? What are some of the challenges that you're facing? How can I help? Just having those types of conversations with your team does a lot to create psychological safety, because you have to instill trust of that employee. And the only way that you're going to do it is if you show that you have a vested interest in them.
It reminds me of an affordable housing organization that I was help running before I left there to go full into this work at Breakfast Leadership. And this was shortly after the pandemic had started. And it was when we could actually, return to office to a certain extent, keep physical distancing, everybody wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. So the team, it was a small team, we were meeting in our boardroom, which was big enough for us to kind of keep a distance from people and all of that. And historically, those meetings, we would go around the room and ask, okay, what's going on with your properties? What challenges, any updates on the renos, any new builds, or renos going in, new tenants moving in, anybody moving out, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to this meeting and everybody's, first, everyone's happy to see each other because we weren't able to for a period of time. So they were just happy to be able to see people. And we got in the meeting and I said, okay, well, let's start around the room. And, they started, well, there's this, and I said, no, we're going to do something different. I want to create a safe space for this. I want everybody to share whatever you're comfortable with, how you're doing. And I used some profanity. I said, I don't give a rat's about the properties right now. I know that's probably not the right thing to say, and I probably don't tell the board I said that, but I truly don't right now. I don't. I care about you, and I want to know, how are you? How are things? What are some things that you're doing that's been helping you? Because it may help somebody in this room. If there's something you're struggling with, again, there might be somebody in this room that knows somebody or a resource or something like that can help. And we went around the room. And it didn't take long. I mean, everybody was able, once the first person started to really open up, then the other people started, it was always that, I don't want to be the first one to say, but once the one individual said some things, it was there. And, for me, it was, they kind of knew what was going on with me because my father had passed away literally like 2 days before they announced, all the shutdowns and all of that. So, he wanted nothing to do with that. So he's like, I'm out, so he checked, he punched out. Don't blame him, because the stress of it all would have probably taken him anyway. So it was probably a blessing for him to miss all of that. But that was, something to, deal with. And it was an interesting dynamic. But at the end of it, after we went around there, I said, anybody have any updates on the properties? And everyone kind of said, no, not really. So basically those meetings were just like, okay, we gotta say something,
Yeah.
but it was more of a, let's make this human. And that helped so much as far as us, getting it. And it helped with, dealing with the tenants as well, because
Mhm.
we couldn't necessarily go into the properties easily because of the guidelines and rules. So, we had to be really creative on some things. And a lot of times we'd say, okay, well, there's an issue with the house, meet outside, we keep the distance that way, talk about it, and then coordinate repairs and all of that to the best of our ability. So, we got creative. And that was another thing. We said, okay, anybody have any ideas on how we could do this? Because I don't want to be, we're going to do it this way. No, it's like, what are some ideas? Because those properties like the back of your hand. And what could we do to minimize any potential exposure or risk for anybody involved, the tenants and you? So, but that reminded me of that. It's like, it just creating that environment where people feel safe.
Yeah.
And it's easy to do, but unfortunately with so many organizations, they're not choosing the easy path on that. They're actually making things harder on themselves than they need to.
Mhm. Very much so. A lot of times you've heard this before. Someone becomes a manager or a supervisor because they're really good at what they do, whether that be an engineer or an IT technology, they're technologically sound or whatever it is that they do. And then it's okay, we're going to promote you to manager. And unfortunately, over the course of the decades that I've been working, the things that would get cut from budgets, leadership training, manager training, and then it went from sort of the butts and seats type delivery of training to cutting that and then it just being, okay, mostly, well, go on this link and learn on your self-learning, and some people are good at that and some people aren't, but it doesn't allow for the dialogue like you just talked about at your meeting. And so, unfortunately, people are still being promoted based on their functional skills and capabilities into these managerial roles without sometimes the foundational element of how do I do this? How do I become a great leader? How do I become a good manager? How do I become an inclusive leader? And that's something that I think is missing in a lot of companies.
I think it's one of the core principles of why there's so much dysfunction and lack of engagement and burnout and toxic workplace cultures is managers have been put into roles that they, quite frankly, are not qualified to do. Doesn't mean they won't be qualified, but they're
Mhm.
not. And I completely agree. When belts get tightened, they usually cut advertising and they cut professional development, which are both foolish decisions. One, if you're not advertising, how are people going to find you? It's not like people are just going to be stumbling. If you,
Mhm.
you you have to market, and I'm a former accountant, so that it burns me to say spend money on marketing, but I know the reality of it now. I wish I would have years and years ago. But same thing with professional development. You want to set up your team for success as an organization. Why? Because everyone will succeed. Your
Mhm.
your customers are going to get a great product. Your people are going to stay. You don't have the turnover, the constant turnover. You won't have the lack of productivity. You won't have the number of people calling in sick or mental health leave or whatever. And you won't have all the dynamics that we see in so many organizations because they're not training the managers. And their managers, and I don't pick on them too much because there's an element of empathy here
Yeah.
that they were
Yep.
put into a situation that they were not prepared to do. And to your point, some people are not good at being self-taught. They need training, and that's how they learn.
Mhm.
Everybody learns differently. Okay. There are some people that thrive in a school setting. There are people that thrive, going to YouTube University and learn so much and they're amazing at it. Everybody's a little bit different. But when it comes to leading your organization, just like when you onboard an employee, wouldn't you want them to be successful? Because eventually, much like, a pro sports analogy for a second, if your players are not performing, you say, well, we'll get rid of the players. You keep getting rid of the players, upper management's going to realize maybe it's not the players.
It's the coach.
It's the coach. Out the coach goes, and they bring in a new coach, and all of a sudden there's this usually short-term turnaround, and see, we made the right decision, and then the normality hits, and then they're kind of mediocre, and then they start failing, and guess what? Wash, rinse, repeat.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare for you to see, and I know that at the time of this recording, college football and pro football have just started. We'll pick on college football for a second. I know there was a game that I was watching the other day. I forget the team, but the coach has been there for 22 years. And I'm like, okay, must be doing something okay for the boosters and, the college to keep this guy around.
Pressure.
Yeah, well, think about it. It's like you're leading an organization. Every 2 to 3 years, you have 100% turnover of your team. Okay. How are you going to navigate that?
Mm.
Well, you better have a system in place.
Yep.
That's why Coach K at Duke, and all the college basketball coaches, for example, those guys always amaze me because every few years they have a complete turnover of talent, complete, and they still, are approaching, championship status. Like, okay, that's a system. And I think organizations should really hammer in on what their system is for them so they can be successful, make the best products and services that they can. Because you and I deserve that as consumers. I want the best. I'm selfish. I want the best stuff. And unfortunately, we don't see that enough. So before we run out of time, we got to talk about your book. So your latest book, I should say. So what's the book about? And I always ask authors this too. What in the world made you want to give up so much of your life and your time to write a book? Because it's not a weekend exercise. It takes a long time. So tell us about the book.
The book is called The Truth About Equity, What It Really Is, What It Isn't, and Why Everyone Wins When We Get It Right. And I wrote the book, it was kind of therapeutic, actually, with the environment that we've been in over the past, couple of years, actually, and the pendulum swinging from what it was like in 2020 with the rise in the social activism to, slowly being eroded to where we are right now. And so there was such misinformation and strategic disinformation around what equity was, diversity and inclusion as well. But really equity, just the average layman does not understand what it is and what it isn't. And so I wanted to have that voice of sanity out there from someone who's experienced, knows what it is, knows what the benefit of it is for effective leadership, effective management, effective business. And that's kind of what I wanted to do and why I wanted to write it, just to be that voice of sanity out there.
Well, it ties in quite well with what we've been talking about today, is because equity is a component, and it's not like, okay, we have a piece of or a pizza and we have 8 people. Okay, we have to cut up the slices equally. All right, well, that's great. There's 8 people, everybody gets a slice. Perfect. But wait a minute, we have an employee that's lactose intolerant. They shouldn't eat it. Okay. Or there's another one that has a gluten allergy. Okay, they shouldn't eat it. All right. Well, now all of a sudden you're like, well, we got to cut the slices a little bit different or figure something out. But we also have to make sure that we're providing some type of nourishment to those other employees so they don't feel excluded because of dietary, or sometimes we're seeing this in recent years as well with the hybrid workforce, where people that are always remote, they come in, they've worked for this organization for several years, but they're not in office all the time. So they go in and they feel like a visitor.
Yeah.
And there are a handful of organizations that I'm aware of, I know there's probably more, that have done that right. Orris Law Insurance in Massachusetts. I did work for them, spoke at one of their events a couple of years ago. Love the team over there. Jennifer and Mark do an amazing job there. And, their workforce is distributed all over the place, but they bring everybody in, at least once a year. And And I was actually at the first one that they were able to do after the pandemic. And no one from my vantage point and just being in the room and reading the room felt like anybody felt like an outsider or a visitor. They felt like it was a family reunion with the family that you love. Everybody was just so happy to be there. And I know they just recently had one because I saw it on a LinkedIn post. They just recently had one too. And that team grew again. And it's like, okay, you're doing something right there. And it's because they've created a place where people want to thrive and can thrive, and they do thrive, and their customers benefit from that. And so I love seeing organizations, and I love seeing people like you out there, preaching it and going, this is what it could be. Because I don't want, even though I do work with organizations to improve their workplace culture and deal with burnout and all of that kind of good stuff, quite frankly, I'd rather not. I wish I didn't have to. I wish it wasn't there, but it is. So I have to do it. But if I can get them to kind of turn the page a little bit and look at things a little bit differently and improve, it's going to make a big difference. And obviously your book is going to be a resource that I would share with them as well, in addition to anything else that I share with them, to look, you can get more out of the organization and be better for your community and your consumers just by some adjustments here and there. It's not like a 180 in most cases. It's a couple adjustments here and there. So I'm thankful that you've given up so much of your time to write the book and release it and everything else. So in closing, anything you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Well, I just want everyone to know that I always say this, that if you want a certain culture within your organization, your institution, your university, your nonprofit, you can't always just rely on the leader. There's also some things that you need to do because you're an individual leader as well. You have a span of influence with your peers. And so all of us need to demonstrate inclusive leader and not just looking up and saying, well, my manager or my leader doesn't do it. They have a huge responsibility because the shadow of a leader is across the organization. But everybody needs to take part in creating the culture that you want to see at your organization. So that's what I want to leave everyone with.
That's beautiful. So where can people find out more about you, your book, and everything else you're doing?
Well, it's on Amazon, so you can just look on Amazon for The Truth About Equity, Celeste Warren. And then also you can go to my website. It's at crwdiversity.com. And you can learn a lot about me. And please sign up to get into contact, and we can also connect and have conversation that way too. And I'm also on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah, make sure to have all those in the show notes. So Celeste, thank you again for your time, and thank you for being you. The world needs more people like you to help improve things for all of us. So really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Michael. Are you a founder, solopreneur, or small business owner drowning in decisions, stress, and sleepless nights? I get it. Entrepreneurial overwhelm is real. From income instability to creative burnout and the isolation no one talks about, it's more than just hustle fatigue. That's why I created Entrepreneurial Overwhelm, a book and a community to help you breathe again. Go to entrepreneurialhelp.com to grab your copy and join a like-minded tribe that gets it. That's entrepreneurialhelp.com. You don't have to build a...
Thanks for listening to the Breakfast Leadership Show, part of the Breakfast Leadership Network. Visit breakfastleadership.com for tips on empowering your business and your life.